Today I'm going to break down a few techniques that are going to be helpful to you when you're doing your next offset cook. We're going to go over how to get the right heat, how to get the right smoke, and ultimately how to get the right results. The first thing we got to talk about is fuel size. Now, you wouldn't burn this split in the same smoker where you would burn this. These are two different size pieces of wood for two different size smokers. This is a great size for the pit behind me. This is a typical backyard size smoker. This is the Franklin barbecue pit. This is 8 to 10 inches long, about 2 inches in diameter. This one's probably 3 inches by 1 inch. So an average of somewhere around 2 inches in diameter is a good rule of thumb for you. Now, if you go a little bit bigger, you're gonna struggle with the fire. If you go smaller, you're gonna struggle with the fire, but this is a good size. If your pit is an intermediate size, say somewhere between 120 gallons and 250 gallons, this would be an appropriate size. This is maybe 14 inches long and an average diameter of 2 to 3 inches. This will work really well. It'll provide long, low sustained heat, and it's not gonna go nuclear hot and then fade into nothing like a split that's too small, because they'll flare up immediately and then burn down, not leave you any coals, and you're left fighting with the fire the whole time. So the first thing you have to do for adequate fire management is proper wood selection. And you want your wood to be dry enough. So a typical rule of thumb is 18 to 20% moisture is gonna give you good flavor along with long sustained heat. It's not gonna be like kiln dried wood, which is gonna go up like tinder, but not really give you the kind of flavor that you're after. And one way to check the wood is to actually split it in half and check the center. Because a lot of times you can check the outside of the wood, it says, oh, it's 12% moisture. But if you split it and check the center, it'll say it's 36%. And that's why your wood isn't burning properly. So those are the first two things you need to look out for before you even worry about how you're building your fire. You have to check the wood moisture and the wood size to make sure it's appropriate for your smoker. Then one caveat before we jump into how we're actually going to put these logs in a pattern that's going to give us what we're after in terms of smoke and heat. We have to talk about the kind of wood that you're using. So some people think you must use post oak. That is the wood you have to use no matter where you are in the country. Post oak is the way. Well, post oak is a subcategory, or it's a subvariety of white oak. And you know what post oak tastes like? Tastes like white oak. It just so happens that all these great barbecue restaurants in Central Texas, they have tons and tons and tons of post oak. So what do they burn for the barbecue in the restaurant? Post oak. So if you have white oak where you are, guess what? Totally fine. If you have red oak, guess what? Totally fine. If you have pecan, totally fine. Now, there are some woods that have different flavors. Fruit woods tend to have milder flavors. Pecan is a nice sweet flavor. It's my particular favorite wood. This is pecan that we have right here. And then when you have oaks of various kinds, they taste pretty similar. I'd be hard pressed to identify one from another. Hickory you can usually identify by a little bit spicier note in the smoke profile. And then the one that you do need to be very aware of is mesquite. Mesquite has a very, very strong flavor profile. It doesn't matter if you burn your fire crystal clear, clean the entire time. The flavor is so intense that it's gonna probably be too intense for you to even enjoy the barbecue that you make with it. But with all that being said, it's much more important how you build and run your fire than it is the specific variety of wood that you're using. So I would take somebody who knows what they're doing cooking over hickory any day of the week over somebody who's got post oak from the very same place that Aaron Franklin gets his post oak if they don't know what they're doing. So your knowledge as a pit master is far more important than the specific variety. Once you've adjusted the intake on the firebox to get the kind of smoke that you want, it's time to adjust the damper to get the right kind of airflow. There are two reasons we adjust the damper. The first is to get gentle airflow throughout the smoker, unless you're after that kind of jet engine, super hot, really fast airflow. The second reason to adjust the damper is to even out temperatures. Right now, from one end to the other of the smoker, we're getting about a 90-degree difference, which means that how things are cooking next to the firebox are going to be very different than how they're cooking next to the smokestack. And in order to even that out and give a consistent cooking environment from one end of the grate to the other, we have to use this damper on the stack to reduce the airflow and kind of fill the smoker with an even amount of heat. Right now, the heat leaves the firebox, goes up to the top of the chamber, moves across, and then finally out the stack, and you have just kind of a dead spot that's 70, 80, 90 degrees cooler than what's right next to the firebox. So if we close it down, we can kind of fill the whole chamber with heat and get even cooking. So I'm gonna adjust this damper and close it down about 50%, and we're gonna check the temperatures from one end to the other and see how close we can get them. So you can see after adjusting the damper down, we have more even temps from one end to the other, and we have slower, more turbulent air, which is going to be better for barbecue and bark formation. So I would encourage you to play with the damper, find out what works for you and gives you the results that you want. So let's get into some of the different configurations you can have for your wood as you're constructing your fires. So first we need to discuss what you're going to do when you're lighting your fire. This is where you're going to want maximum airflow, you're going to want maximum flame because you need it to catch, because you don't want to be fighting with your fire before it ever gets going. So the easiest way to do this, in my opinion, if you have a round firebox, that's actually a help to you because it slightly lifts the wood off of the bottom, giving you airflow underneath. And so the bottom pieces of wood can catch. If you just have a flat bottom to your firebox, then you're just going to need something to lift the next layer of wood logs off of the bottom so that they can get proper airflow. So a flat bottom firebox, what I would do is 2 pieces of roughly equal height on the bottom, then on top, go 3 wide. And I always turn the thicker part of a piece of wood toward the center. So if I have this chunk that's kind of triangular, the thicker side is toward the center, and then I'd go 3, and then I like to start with a big coal bed, so I use quite a bit of wood. I'd go 3 more on top, again, thicker part toward the middle, and that should burn really hot, get everything burned off that might be on the grates, and then you have a big coal bed for when you actually get your fire going. Now, if you have a round firebox, I would do the exact same thing, except because the ones on the bottom, these 2 logs will actually burn because they're lifted off from the bottom of the firebox, I would go 3 on the bottom as well. So a total of 9, that should get you plenty of coals to get started. So this is the lattice structure that's going to be maximum airflow, maximum heat, maximum efficiency. So it's not great for producing smoke flavor, but it's great for producing heat. If you're after smoke flavor, this isn't the right configuration. One caveat for that is if your wood is a little too green, then you're going to have to work and make sure you get enough airflow for it to burn, and you are still going to produce smoke. So we're going to talk later about the different smoke levels, 1, 2, and 3, and how to achieve those. Generally speaking, this lattice structure will give you a smoke level 0 or 1, depending on how you're running the intake to your firebox or the door to your firebox. If you're letting lots of oxygen in, you're getting very little smoke flavor. If you're kind of restricting the oxygen, you can get more smoke flavor. But again, it depends on how green your wood is. If your wood is nice and seasoned, this is not how I would recommend burning a wood fire for maximum flavor. So to construct a Goldie style fire, you put 3 logs on the bottom. These are called base logs. They're there to provide low sustained heat and a lot of smoke flavor. So the 3 on the bottom, if you're going after more heat, you can separate them a little bit so you have flames licking up in between the logs and you get more heat and a little bit less smoke. If you're going after more smoke flavor, you can squeeze them together and it kind of functions as one big log on the bottom, but it's right next to those coals, so it's going to be burning at a high temperature but not producing a whole lot of flame just because there's not very much oxygen present. The next layer of logs you can think of as heat logs, because these logs on the bottom are mainly for smoke and they do provide low sustained heat, but the logs that sit on top are going to be an open flame. They're going to produce a lot of heat. So 1 log for low heat, 2 logs for medium heat, and then 3 logs for high heat. You can of course keep adding logs if you're trying to get even hotter, but usually this works for most people smokers if you have an appropriate sized piece of wood to start off with. Another thing to note is the way they do it there is they will break these down into coals once it's kind of run its course. So they'll build fires successively. They're not continually adding logs. There are some restaurants where they kind of continually add logs to maintain the same temperature. But with Goldies, they're restricting airflow into the firebox, and that is the limiting reactant in terms of producing heat. So what's limiting how much heat is coming through the firebox into the cook chamber is how much oxygen they're letting into the firebox. So the wood, there's plenty of wood. There's more than enough wood. You can think of it this way. If I give you 1 million pieces of bread and 2 million pieces of lettuce and 10 million pieces of tomato, but I give you 1 piece of ham, how many ham sandwiches can you make? You can make only 1 ham sandwich, okay? So in this case, what is like the piece of ham that limits how many sandwiches you can make? The oxygen limits how hot this fire can burn and how much heat it can make. So it will continue to run at a steady temperature until the logs are basically burned down into coals. At that point, they kind of crush them up and then spread the coals out and rebuild a fire. So they're thinking not in terms of adding a log, adding a log, adding a log. It's I build a fire. When that one's run its course, I build a new fire. When that one's run its course, I build another one. And you just have to find out what works best for you according to the wood you have and the smoker you have. For them, it obviously works extremely well. I would consider trying it if you're searching for more smoke flavor. The next fire style I want to talk about is one that uses relatively green wood, but they burn a clean fire because green wood plus a clean fire equals a smoky flavor. Whereas if you have kiln dried wood and you're burning a clean fire, there's almost no flavor at all. If you have ever had food cooked on a pellet smoker where the pellets didn't really provide much flavor, it's kind of like that sensation when you take a bite. So with green wood, you can burn what would be a much cleaner fire, but still produce flavor. So what a lot of people will do is they'll have kind of a channel in the middle where they'll have coals, they'll have a log on either side to raise the next set of logs up above those coals so that they burn in open flame and produce heat. And they burn what would be relatively clean, but like I said, the green wood makes it nice and smoky. So you have two logs beside each other, and then for heat, you can add logs, as many as are necessary. On most smokers, 2 or 3 above that is pretty good. Whereas if you just had 3 on the bottom of the firebox, you wouldn't produce that much heat, but you'd produce a lot more smoke. The next fire style I want to talk to you about is called a bundle fire. At least that's what I've heard it called. And if the wood that you're using is a little too thin, or if it's kiln dried and you're really working hard to produce smoke rapidly, you can build a bundle fire. Essentially, you're doing everything you can to limit oxygen flow and produce smoke and smoky flavor. So this might be if you have a really short cook, like you're doing turkeys and you want extra smoky at the beginning, or if you're doing chicken and you want extra smoky, or even ribs and you're trying to get a lot of smoke right at the beginning before you ramp up temperatures. The bundle fire is exactly what it sounds like. You put them right next to each other, not much room for oxygen, and you just stack them, and it looks something like this, and it's going to sit there and produce lots of smoke. Now, the one thing you need to know about the difference between bad tasting smoke and good tasting smoke isn't what I thought for a long time. For a long time, I thought if you see any smoke coming out of the smokestack, you've made a grave error, and this is the end of the world. You have to move heaven and earth to change what you're doing with the fire so you don't see any smoke. I've learned that that's not actually quite true. It's totally fine to see smoke. As a matter of fact, I think it's helpful most of the time to see smoke. It's totally fine to see smoke, as a matter of fact. It's beneficial because you're trying to flavor the meat with smoke, and unless you're producing enough of those compounds, you're not going to get the richness of smoke flavor that you're really after. The big line of difference between good flavor and bad flavor is whether or not you're burning an open flame in the firebox. So if you're just smoldering away, that can oftentimes taste bitter. It's not very good, and it can taste good for a little bit, then eventually it just wears on you and it's just not as good as you thought it was with the first bite. If you're burning an open flame the whole time, what you get is a very rich, robust smoke flavor. And so the system that I've come up with is not very creative, but it is useful. I use the numbers 0, 1, 2, and 3 to describe the level of smoke flavor that's being added. 0 is burning a crystal clear fire, so what you see out of the smokestack just looks like a mirage. It's just waves of heat. And that is very little smoke flavor, but you're burning the wood extremely efficiently. This is something that you would use at the end of a cook when everything's wrapped and you don't need any more smoke flavor on there. All you're trying to do is burn an efficient fire to get those things finished off. Smoke level 1 is burning a fire where it could be because the wood is green or you're restricting oxygen a little bit, but you're seeing some light blue smoke that's coming out of the smokestack. This is a mild flavoring of the smoke. It's not super rich or robust. It's good. You will like the flavor. You're gonna just wish that you had a little bit more. This might be something that will happen from time to time while you're doing a long cook like brisket or beef ribs or pork butt. This isn't something that I typically shoot for, but it's something that occurs in the process. If you don't like a really robust smoke flavor and you want to dial it back, a smoke level 1 might be the right answer for you. Smoke level 2 is when you're burning a fire and you're producing a fair amount of smoke. So it's not just thick billowing plumes of smoke, but it's definitely there. You can definitely see it. It's not just a thin blue smoke that you may have heard about, but you're still burning an open flame in the firebox. And in my experience, for any fire style that you have, you never want huge flames unless you're trying to get something nuclear jet engine hot, like you're searing a roast or something like that. What you want is short flames, whether you have a 1,000-gallon pit or a Franklin pit like the one behind me. Short flames are good. So one thing that I use to describe A very, very smoky smoke that if it were any dirtier would be too dirty is smoke level 2.5. And this is the maximum restriction of oxygen that you can do without killing all the flames in the firebox. So you might have little bitty tiny flames on the wood and you're producing lots and lots of smoke. That's okay. That's something that I would use if I'm smoking chicken or turkey or sausage or the beginning of a rib cook, just to lay on a lot of smoke flavor. But if you smother out the fire, you're gonna get some of those off flavors that you probably want to avoid. And that's associated with smoke level 3. That's simply smoldering smoke, something you might get in a Weber Smoky Mountain where the wood is hot enough to give off volatile compounds, that is smoke, but it's not hot enough to burn in open flame. That's gonna produce that rich variety of compounds that makes it worthwhile to cook with an offset smoker. The whole reason I use offset smokers isn't just because I like to punish myself and sweat and manage a fire and deal with wood guys. Wood guys are the worst people in the world, by the way. They're like worse than used car salesmen. If they say it's about a cord, it's never about a cord. If they say it's bone dry, assume that it's 40% moisture. It's just a word for the wise out there. So just be prepared and maybe check out what they have before giving them a stack of cash to drop it off, because they always only take cash. I understand, I don't begrudge them for not wanting to pay taxes, but I use this for my business and I would like to make it a business expense. Anyway, all that aside, what you need is open flame to produce good flavor. Smoldering smoke is only useful, in my opinion, if you're cold smoking something. Smoke level 3, in my opinion at least, is only really useful or really preferable when you're cold smoking something like cheese or salmon. Say you have a fillet of salmon and you've cured it and you want to cold smoke it, you're gonna make your own lox, which is delicious, by the way. If you've never done it, please do it. That is a smoke level 3 environment. You're trying to keep it as cool as possible so you don't coagulate those proteins and change the texture of the salmon, but you're laying on smoke flavor. In my experience, you only really get those weird off flavors of smoke at higher temperatures that you're cooking at. So if you're cooking at 200 and you have smoke level 3 where it's just smoldering fire, then those off flavors start to build up. For some reason that I don't quite understand, if you're doing cold smoking and the protein that you're smoking is, say, 50 degrees, you don't pick up any of those off flavors. So those are the 3 varieties of smoke flavor. If you include 0 and 2.5, it's 5 in total. But it's a good guideline for how you need to think about doing your cooks. At the beginning of cooks, I almost always recommend start with like a smoke level 2, where you're burning an open flame, you're restricting the oxygen, or your wood is green, you're producing a significant amount of smoke, but you still have open flame in the firebox. Then smoke level 1 could be you're pushing for more heat now. Say you want to get pullback on the bone on some ribs that you're cooking, or you're trying to get a little bit more airflow, get some barking up of what you're cooking. That's a useful tool in your arsenal as well. But with those 3 smoke profiles, you can get pretty much any kind of protein, the smoke flavor that it needs, so it can really shine and be at its best. After all of that description of how we're gonna, manipulate these logs to get the flavor and heat that we want, let's talk about the other 2 inputs you have when it comes to running your offset smoker. The first is the firebox door or a vent to let air into the firebox. The second is the damper on the stack. They are related. One does affect the other, but I think it's most helpful to think of them as performing 2 separate but very valuable functions. If you think about the firebox door letting oxygen in as the regulator for the kind of flavor that you're producing, that will allow you to dial it into exactly what you want. On most smokers, you just crack the firebox door and you'll have enough air to burn a smoky but still open flame fire that's going to produce a really rich flavor that you're after. It's what separates offset smokers from every other kind of cooker on the market, and I will fight you if you disagree with me on that. But that firebox door, you can use that to dial in smoke level 0, 1, 2, 2.5, 3. For further clarification, smoke level 2.5 is basically the same as smoke level 2, except you have even more fuel in there, producing even more smoke, and you just have those small flames. But if you put in too much fuel, there's no way for you to choke off enough of the oxygen without the fire dying, and then you're at smoke level 3 producing off flavors. So the manipulation of that firebox door is gonna dial in flavor for you. Now the stack is gonna help you dial in heat management. So if you have the stack wide open, then the hot gases from the firebox go up to the top of the cook chamber, they kind of travel over to the stack end and go out, and you have kind of a worsening dead spot across the grate. So you might have big differences between one side of the grate and the other side. By dampening down the stack, you slow the airflow, and you can kind of think of it as filling the whole cook chamber with that hot air, and you even out the temperatures, and perhaps even more importantly, you reduce the airflow. So a slower airflow is going to be a gentler cook, and you're going to have more turbulence. You're going to lay on more bark, more smoke flavor. There's enough time for the smoke in the cook chamber to flavor the meat before it exits through the stack. So manipulating the stack is good for temperature control. Manipulating the firebox door is good for flavor control. And then the amount of fuel you use is going to be kind of like the baseline temperature. So if you use too much fuel, you're going to be fighting to pull it back. If you don't use enough fuel, you're going to be fighting to maintain temperature while still producing smoke flavor. There are a lot of nuances, and there's no replacement for spending a lot of time next to a fire and figuring out what it does in your cooker. But I've spent thousands of hours next to a fire, and I'm hoping that this is a distillation of that experience that makes it easier for you to get the results that you're after. There are myriad other issues that can come up while running a fire for an offset smoker. I can't possibly cover them all here, but I think this is probably 98% of the issues that you'll have come up. There are a few one-offs that we're all going to encounter from time to time, like what if your wood has been rained on, or what if there's dirt on your wood, or what if, fill in the blank. But this is a good guideline for you to hopefully have a lot of success. And if you're using these techniques, please tag us, let us know. And we want to check out what you guys are doing. Maybe we'll learn some stuff too. That's the best for us. But with all of this fire hose of information, let's go build a fire in the Franklin pit. This pit, though it's very easy to run, doesn't have any kind of way to completely restrict airflow on the firebox, and it's got no damper for the stack. So your skills in manipulating the logs in the firebox are going to be critically important to achieve the smoke flavor and the temperature that you want. All right, I got 4 logs here. We're going to build a Goldie style fire. That is 3 base logs. We're going to have them almost touching because I want to produce a significant amount of smoke flavor. We're going to have 1 heat log on top that's going to be burning an open flame. And because we can't really restrict the airflow into the firebox too much, we might have to keep an eye on it. And if it's burning too hot, we'll have to take this one out and just focus on keeping those base logs for a consistent heat and consistent smoke flavor. But let's go do it. With fire management, there's science and art to it, and then a little bit of instinct. And the more you do it, the better you're going to become at doing it. The best way to become a pit master is to get out there and build fires and run cooks, and you're going to learn quickly. I think if you reference this, it's going to be a good touchstone for you. Oh, wait, maybe if I'm getting this result and I don't like it this way, I can try this instead. So it's my best attempt to distill all the hours I spent watching fires for you, the viewers, to have better experiences with cooking. If you guys are using these techniques, please tag me at Mad Scientist BBQ and Embers TV, because I want to see what you guys are doing. It's always awesome to see you guys post stuff and see the work that I put in trying to teach what I've learned about barbecue paying off for you and the people you care about. So thank you guys for watching. We'll catch you in the next episode. When I first got into barbecue, there were 2 things that I wanted to perfect. One was brisket, and the other was ribs, because I'd always heard about people making ribs, and I'd eaten ribs, and some of them were good, some of them were not so good, but I'd seen some on TV, and I thought, if I could ever make some like that, then I've arrived, and I can feel like a success with my pit in the backyard. So today, we're focusing on ribs. If you want to check out brisket, check out that video. I break down everything I know about brisket cooking for your viewing pleasure. But today, we're focusing on ribs, and these are actually remarkably simple. There are a few guidelines that you can follow to make sure that you have a successful rib cook. The first issue that you'll run into is whether or not you should get St. Louis cut spare ribs, full spare ribs, baby back ribs, loin back ribs, and you might be confused by that. There are 2 broad categories of ribs that you should be aware of. The first would be the spare rib. They come from lower down on the hog, and they're usually straighter, meatier, and a little fattier. Whereas loin back ribs or baby back ribs are 2 names for the same cut that come from higher up on the hog, so there's more curve in the bone, and they're usually a little leaner than the spare ribs. I personally prefer the spare ribs. I think you get more meat on each bone, but some people might like baby backs more, but this method can apply to them both equally. Today, we're going to be cooking spare ribs. And spare ribs, like I said, come from lower down on the animal. They actually include the sternum, unless you get them St. Louis cut, where they take off the sternum, they take off some of the cartilage, and they have more of a rectangular appearance. And these require almost no trimming, and they're very easy to cook. So I would highly recommend you get these because they're available almost everywhere, and they're going to give you a good product, and you're going to have good results. The basic process for today's cook is to keep it simple, but do it very well. So we're going to take those St. Louis ribs. We're going to season them simply, salt, pepper, and a little bit of Lowry's to give some of that umami flavor. We're going to put it on the smoker at 200 degrees, nice and smoky, so we get lots of smoke flavor because we want it to be nice and robust because we don't have 16 hours to put on smoke flavor like we might have with a brisket. This is going to be a much shorter cook, so we want to make sure we get that smoke flavor in before they get cooked. Then we're going to wrap them and get them nice and tender because there are two things in barbecue that you must do. You have to make sure that the meat is smoky and it's tender. And following these simple instructions, you're going to be able to get smoky and tender ribs, and your guests are going to be extremely happy. We're going to focus on those two things, and then I'm going to give you a few other tips and tricks to take your barbecue ribs from good to great. You can use any kind of seasoning you want. I'm keeping it simple because I want to focus on perfecting the simple. Then you can incorporate the complex. So the outline for the cook is simple. We're going to start at 200 degrees, nice and smoky. We're going to increase the temperature to 250. Once we have that smoke flavor on there, we're starting to get some pullback on the bones and starting to get some fat render. We're going to wrap these things up to finish them off. And we have a special trick that's going to really help you increase flavor and juiciness in these ribs that we're going to show you later. Once they get tender, we'll pull them off, and then you can judge for yourselves whether or not this is the way you want to cook ribs in the future. I bet it is. Here we have our St. Louis cut spare ribs. The beauty of St. Louis cut spare ribs is there's not a lot that you have to do with trimming. Now, when you're selecting your ribs, I would suggest looking for two things. One is thickness. Generally speaking, the thicker the ribs, the better they're going to be in the end. The other thing I'd look for is good marbling. So we have two example racks that we chose to show you what each of those looks like. Here we have a nice meaty rib that's going to do well over a long cook. And here we have a rib that's thinner, but you're going to be able to turn each of these into amazing racks of ribs. As far as the trimming and prep for these goes, it's very, very simple. On this side, all I'm looking to do is cut off the parts that are kind of hanging off that aren't really square. So I would square it up down here and take this off. On this rack of ribs, I would kind of square it up at this end, and then we're going to score the membrane on the back. Two very simple processes that mean that prep for St. Louis spare ribs takes you about 30 to 45 seconds, and you're good to go. So this cut, it's just too thin to do well over a long cook. So unfortunately, it's going to have to find another purpose. You could take this, you could use it in beans or another place where it can really shine. It's not going to shine on the smoker, so it's best to use it for another purpose. Then we have this right here hanging off. Let's kind of round that up. And it's very thin here, so I'm going to watch that, but we have kind of squared off looking rib. The other side, here I have this skirt that I'm just going to take off because it's going to curl up and give me an uneven finish on this. So for the sake of evenness, I'll take this off. Also, a flavorful piece of meat you can use for another better purpose. And then this membrane right here, which is what separates the internal organs of the animal from these ribs and muscles on the outside. You can take it off. You can get in there and kind of pull off the whole membrane, but it's kind of a lot of work. It can be messy. Sometimes you need a paper towel. You'll need gloves. And I found that the membrane actually holds moisture in the ribs, at least in my opinion. So I like to leave the membrane on, but I don't want the membrane to be one solid piece when you take a bite because I don't want to take a bite of rib and have the whole rib tear off. So I just score the membrane. And I come down here, make one cut like this, and repeat that, going all the way up the membrane. And then come at about a 90-degree angle and make some more cuts. Doesn't have to be super scientific, but that is it. Okay, we got the first rack trimmed up. They're a little smaller just because this end was so thin, but we're going to do the same thing to the other rack right here. So right here, it's pretty thin. We have a bone sticking out. I'm just going to cut this straight across. Again, throw this in some beans or something where it's going to work well. And square this up. Round corners are going to be your friends because the rounder it is, the better it's going to work. Ready? Okay. And then here we're going to take off this skirt. And then finally, score this membrane. It's got a little bit of a gash from the processor. Not a big deal, but this membrane and the fat that's underneath is going to help keep these juicy, but we don't want it to stick together. So that is just about how I like it. We're going to look for anything that's kind of hanging off on both of these racks, and then we're going to season them up. So you have these two trimmed up. They're ready to season. Salt and pepper on both sides, and then just a little bit of Lowry's for some more umami on this side right here. Ribs are thinner than most of the other cuts of barbecue meat, so we want to make sure that we don't go too heavy with the salt. So be generous, but don't be overzealous with the seasoning. And then we're going to come back with just a little bit of this Lowry's because we don't want to oversalt it, because Lowry's is pretty potent, but we want to add a little bit more flavor because that salt is really going to pop when you take a bite of these ribs. We're 2 hours in on this pork rib cook, and right now we've been focusing on smoke, and we keep the temperature low because we don't want to get these ribs cooked before we put the smoke on them that we need. At this point, we're going to increase the temperature to 250. We're going to bump it up because we want that pullback. We really want to start the cooking process, and we have a special secret weapon. You guys have probably seen ribs being cooked and then they get sprayed. Ribs are the only thing that I spray. I think it's counterproductive for almost every other barbecue item, but to maintain the moisture in the rib, because they're so thin, you have to do something. For a long time, I used to spray with apple cider vinegar or water, distilled vinegar, tried mixing in sauces. All that I found was that it washed away the bark a little bit, and I didn't really like the results. It helped with moisture and keeping things from drying out, but it was always a sacrifice. But recently, I've been experimenting with this. It is spray tallow. Now, this is not just spray tallow, it's Wagyu spray tallow, and it kind of has to be, because in order for this to be spray tallow, it's got to be liquid at room temperature, and regular tallow is simply not a liquid at room temperature. So this coats the outside of the ribs, absorbs smoke flavor, adds a flavor of its own and a richness of its own, and doesn't wash away any of the rub or any of the seasoning or bark that you've started to create on the outside of what you're cooking. So for me, I think this is the way to go with spraying ribs. Now, you can use vinegar, you can use water, you can use whatever you like. I would just recommend that you at least try this, because I think after you try it the first time, you'll never go back. So let's take a peek at these ribs, see how they're doing. We're going to start spraying and increasing the temp up to 250. After spraying the ribs and having a little bit of added protection from the spray tallow, we're going to increase the temperature to do a couple things. One, we want to render that fat that's on the outside of the ribs, because we don't want it to be chewy. We want it to just bite through and be juicy. And we want the proteins in that meat to coagulate. That is, we want them to change shape so that they plump up. And you guys have probably seen this on meat that you've cooked, so where it changes shape. So you can think of a burger. You might put it on completely flat, but it plumps up and gets really thick in the middle. We want the same thing to happen with our ribs. And the way you do that is by increasing the temperature rapidly, much like you would increase the temperature rapidly on the proteins in the meat that you have when you have a burger patty on the grill. So we want that bone to be sticking out of both ends, and we want a big chunk of meat right in the middle so that every bite you take is very satisfying and you're not nibbling little pieces of meat off of the bone. Now we're going to go check on our cook, spray it with some tallow, add some logs to the fire, get to 250, and then cruise on for about 60 to 90 minutes before we do our next check-in. Now we're going to go check on our rib cook, see how it's doing, evaluate where we are and how we should move forward. We're probably going to add a couple logs to the fire, get that temperature up to 250, and really start cooking. 4.5 hours in, and we are ready to wrap. And the way we're going to wrap is a little bit different, and the timing that we're using is going to be different than the traditional 3-2-1 method. If you like that method, you're welcome to keep using it. But of all the people I've taught to do it this way, I don't think any of them have ever gone back to the 3-2-1 method. I think this is a superior product. You're going to enjoy it more. And it's pretty simple, not harder to do. So I'm going to grab the ribs. We're going to wrap them up in a sheet of butcher paper and smoked tallow. So this might be a new way for you, but it's the way that I found that I like the best. A caveat for that is that if I'm doing events and I'm cooking, say, 40 or 50 racks of ribs, and I'm serving it to the general population, they probably want some sauce. And so then I will wrap in foil and I'll sauce those at the end. But I think this produces a better eating rib. So if you're feeding your friends and family, I think this is going to be the way you choose to do it. I would suggest you try it, and I bet you don't go back. All right, if we look at these, they look beautiful. Nothing is burning. Deep dark color. This fat is beginning to render. So this is all stuff that I'm really liking. I mean, we've been cooking them for a while, but they're not dried out at all because we're cooking gently here. we're reducing the airflow with the damper, and we're keeping it nice and gentle, nice and smoky. And at this point, we're after tenderness. So the process is very simple. I'm going to grab some of this smoked tallow. You can use lard if you want. No big deal. I just happen to have a lot of tallow on hand. And we put it down. Be generous. Put it meat side down. And then we wrap it up like a little package. So we're meat side down, meat side up. Meat side back down, meat side up, and then lastly, so we finished wrapping it. It's meat side down because essentially I want to confit all the meat side because the back side is protected by that membrane already. So we want to get maximum juiciness by doing it this way. I'm going to get the other rack, do it the exact same way. You smell good. It might seem weird for me to talk about rendering fat on ribs because they don't have a big fat layer on the top, but if you're wondering what I'm talking about, it's when I poke the fat, it just gives way and spills out a ton of juice because it has cooked hot enough that the fat begins to break down. I had a little bit of a geyser right there. That's always good to see, but this is what I'm after. Meat side up. We finish meat side down. And here we have a little parcel of absolute deliciousness. People will try this oftentimes, and then they will let me know. I didn't really expect much out of that, but they were by far the best ribs I've ever made. So, try it out. You'll be glad. At this point, we are going to rock between 275 and 300 to get these things finished off. And we'll try to get a little bit more pullback on the bone. We cooked pretty gently in the beginning, so we didn't get a strong pullback at the beginning. But if you want more pullback, cook hotter in the beginning. If you're more concerned about putting on a strong smoke flavor, keep it nice and low, nice and smoky. At this point, we're going to run the fire to get that 275 to 300, and we're going for smoke level 0. If you have any questions about that, you can check out the fire management portion of this masterclass, and I'll break down exactly what that means. The short version is lots of oxygen, very efficient fire, maximizing the heat energy that we get out of the wood. It's been a little over an hour, and these ribs are ready to come off. The way I test for doneness is I pick them up, and I go by feel. When it feels like they're wanting to fall apart, but they're being held up by the paper or the foil, that tells me that they're done. If you're wanting to know what a temperature is on those, it's probably around 205. We're gonna get them out, we're gonna put them on the table, and then we'll take some temps for you guys, and then we'll kind of wrap them up and let them cool. Then ultimately, we get to slice them open and see how we did. For you guys who are wanting to know the temps, actually, I'm just gonna go through the paper. A part of the problem with trying to temp these on the smoker through the paper is that they're so thin that just the point of this instant read thermometer is what's going to tell you the true temperature. And you could be too low, you could be too high. There's no way to really know until you search around a little bit. So this one right here is looking 201, and this one right here 206. So they both feel good. The look that you might be after is something that looks like this, where it looks like it wants to fall apart, but it can't quite fall apart. The juice in here is kind of weighing it down too. This one, since it's shorter, it's not going to bend as much, but it's the same thing. You can feel it kind of wrapping over your finger. That's the way to tell. Now, after you've cooked, 1,000 racks of ribs, this will be second nature to you. But as a good guideline, I'd say 205 will get you in the ballpark. You might not be exactly where you want to be, but you'll be close. So we're just going to wait for a few minutes, let these cool down, because if I slice into them right now while they're super hot, all the water on that slice is going to evaporate, and I'm going to have this dry kind of oxidized surface. So I'm going to let this cool to about 155 degrees, 150 degrees, and that'll be pretty quick because these pieces of meat are relatively thin, especially in comparison to something like a brisket. So maybe a half of an hour sitting out here, and we don't want to do a long rest because ribs can kind of get overcooked with a long rest. There's a lot of variation there. If you need to rest it, you can do it the same way you do briskets, but I like to serve them as fresh as possible. All right, when I'm looking at this, I see a deep red color. Looks really nice. I see some black pepper throughout it, and I see some pullback on the bone. So each bite is going to be that meatier bite that we were after. At this point, if you guys want to sauce these, you absolutely 100% can. What I would suggest is saucing them. I would dilute the sauce maybe 50-50 with water or apple cider vinegar, paint it on, put it back on the smoker long enough for that sauce to get tacky, and then you're ready to go. For me, I like the simplicity of the meat, the pepper, the salt, and the smoke. There aren't a lot of things, but when they're working in perfect harmony, it's something truly special. It's like an orchestra. For an orchestra to sound great, not all of the instruments have to be playing at the same time. But if you have a few instruments playing perfectly in tune, what you get is something spectacular, something that draws people in, and this food does the exact same thing. So I'm going to slice these up, and we're going to take a look for a smoke ring. We're going to see how juicy it is, and ultimately it's all about flavor. I'm going to take a bite and let you know what I think. Pro tip for you guys, don't be a hero. Flip it over to the bone side, look at the bones, and let that guide each cut. Now, there's some wizards out there who can cut from the meat side and never hit a bone. I haven't met any of those people, so I'd suggest cutting on the bone side. Doesn't look as pretty, but you're less likely to butcher these ribs. So, flip these over, see what we got. So I'll just take one from the center here. That's looking really juicy to me. I mean, if you want a juicy rib, this is a great way to do it. The smoke ring is actually so thick that this part of the rib is almost completely pink, only kind of a bullseye of non-smoke ring right there. So when I look at this, I see, first of all, the smoke ring, because we started really low and we're taking the cook really slowly, the smoke ring is so thick that it's actually touching for a majority of this rib. There are a couple spots here and here where I see that there's unsmoke ring meat. And then on this end, you can see where the true color of the meat that hasn't been affected by the smoke making, it's a compound between myoglobin and some of the smoke products. We don't have to get into all the details here, but that's the true color of the meat. All this pink stuff is from the smoke ring. So we should have good smoke flavor on here. If we squeeze this, we see there's lots of juice in this thing. So we don't have to have special ribs. All you have to have is the knowledge to cook them properly and a few tools at your disposal to create something that's going to be smoky, tender, and ultimately exactly what you're after. Okay, so now the moment of truth. I'm going to take a bite and we're going to evaluate it. There is a membrane on the back that we scored, but wow, that's a lot of juice that just flung off my fingertips. It's a good sign as well. But I don't think the membrane is going to be an issue. I think it actually helped keep this thing juicy. What we want is a clean bite, but we don't want it to fall apart. We'll see how close we got on tenderness. Oh. The flavor is just so rich and good. Oh. If you want ribs that are as juicy as possible, this is the method. It's rich, but it's not so sweet with sauce that after you eat a few, you feel like, oh no, I think I'm gonna be sick. It's a completely different experience. So, if you want sauce, you can absolutely do it. If you want a more complex rub, you can do it. It's just how you want to score for the orchestra that is the flavor profile that you're after. For me, I like simple, I like it done well, just like this. I would encourage you guys to go out there, try it, use the products that we did, use the method that we did, and I think you're gonna be really happy with the results. Examining these bites, here we have clean bone underneath. That tells us we cooked it long enough, but we didn't have disintegration of the meat, so it didn't all fall apart, it didn't all come off the bone. In the popular imagination, fall off the bone ribs are the ideal. Whereas for barbecue nerds, you think fall off the bone, oh, that's a rookie mistake. Now, if you're gonna make a mistake on going too tender rather than not tender enough, because people will forgive too tender 11 times out of 10. But in order to have an ideal experience, you want a bite through on the rib, but you don't want it to fall apart. You want it to maintain its structure. In Texas, they go extra hard with this. And so there's actually some chew to the ribs. You kind of have to tear them off a little bit. I like a little bit more tender, but not all the way to fall off the bone. To me, this is exactly how I like to do it. But if you like fall off the bone, don't let me judge you. Do it the way you want. I hope you guys enjoyed this rib masterclass episode. I would encourage you to try some of the techniques that you've learned in this video, because I think they're going to really help you make the kind of barbecue that you have in your head. For me, there are flavors that I have in my head that I seek to recreate or to create for the first time. There's an ideal rib bite for me. There's an ideal bite of brisket. And I hope this gets you a couple steps closer to achieving that. And I can't wait to see all the ribs that you guys cook, because viewing this is one thing. It can be entertaining, but actually getting out there and doing it and cooking for yourself and the people you care about is where the real payoff is. And I can't wait to see all the pictures you guys post. Please tag me at Mad Scientist Barbecue on any social media platform where you're doing this, because seeing those inspires me to try new things, to try new techniques, and ultimately to share it with all of you. So at Mad Scientist Barbecue on every social media platform. I can't wait to see what you cook. All right, guys, today we're going to be cooking something that isn't a usual barbecue item that you might cook on an offset smoker, but something that does incredibly well when cooked in this way. It highlights one of the main strengths of offset smokers, that being smoke flavor, and it also highlights something you might not think about, the huge convection potential that the offset smoker has. Today we're cooking a standing rib roast. It's a prime rib, there are bones on it, it's a huge piece of meat, and it is amazingly delicious. The best way I think you can cook it is either with radiant heat or with an offset smoker. We're gonna build an incredible crust on the outside, we're gonna add smoke flavor, and then we're gonna get this smoker behind me ripping hot to put a sear on the outside, so you have smoke flavor, you have Maillard reaction, you have rendered fat, and you have beef flavor up front, all supported by salt and pepper. It's gonna be an ideal way to eat an incredible piece of beef. The process that we're gonna do today is very simple, but if you execute it properly, this meat is really gonna shine. We're gonna start with a fire that keeps the smoker at about 250 degrees. Not too hot, because we don't want too much carryover cooking when we take this rib roast off. We don't wanna overcook the meat by accident. We're going to take it up eventually to as hot as the smoker can get, probably 600 degrees, to put a crust on the outside. And our seasoning is going to be heavy salt and heavy pepper. This is a huge chunk of meat and can take a lot of salt and pepper. And with a great piece of meat like we have here today, we're not going to have to add other flavors to make it really shine. So I'm going to grab the meat, I'll get it on the board, and I'll show you the very simple prep that it takes to make an incredible cut of meat. Here we have the rib roast, obviously the bone side showing here. We're gonna go with just salt and pepper. And one thing that you'll probably never see me do for any other cut of meat is use this side of the shaker. Here is just a mix of 50-50 kosher salt and 16 mesh black pepper. And we're gonna cover it very liberally on the outside because we want the salt to begin to penetrate, and we wanna build a crust with that black pepper. Now, if you're worried about over salting this, just think about how much salt you put on a rack of pork ribs, and they're this thin. This thing is really thick, so we can go nice and heavy and we don't have to worry about over salting. As a matter of fact, we may even add some finishing salt when this is finished cooking. So let's season it up. Don't forget the sides. Flip this over. Just gonna trim out some of these hanging bits. Actually, just one. And then back at it. One thing to note is you can go extra heavy on this fat side with the salt and the pepper. A lot of it's going to kind of come off as the fat begins to render. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. It's gonna make just a really flavorful coating on the outside. And with a heavy dose of our very simple rub, it's time to put this thing on. I'm gonna put the thick end toward the fire because it needs to heat up more than this thin side. And those bones are gonna conduct heat so that it'll cook a little bit more evenly, even though this side is gonna be closer to the fire, taking a majority of the punishment from the heat. And I'm gonna go fat side up because in that smoker, the heat comes from the top side. And so I want this fat to protect the whole thing, keep everything inside nice and juicy. So let's put it on. 250. Oh, if I can lift it with one arm. Nice and heavy. We're gonna let it go for the next couple hours at 250 degrees. The reason I chose 250 degrees is because it's low enough that the outside won't go to well done before the inside gets to the temperature we're shooting for. But it's not so low that we're gonna be waiting around forever for the thing to reach the proper temperature. Also, if we start to cook really hot, we're gonna get a lot of carryover cooking, which is the heat that's in the outside layers of the meat slowly transferring its way in, and so we might be higher than the temperature that we're reading when we take it off. So we're gonna pull this off at 120 degrees internal, and if we have a couple degrees of carryover cooking, say it goes to 123, 125, not a huge deal. But if we get a lot of carryover cooking, like it takes it to 140, then we've overcooked this piece of meat and we're gonna be too late to do anything about it. We're gonna go gently up to that temperature. Also, it allows us to build smoke flavor on the outside. We're gonna take it to 120. We'll check back in with you when we're close. The internal temperature of this rib roast is now 120 degrees. So we're gonna pull it out, we're gonna let it rest here on the cutting board, then we're gonna tent it in foil. It will continue to climb a couple degrees, but because we've been going low and slow, it shouldn't climb too much. But if we left it on for the next part, then we'd probably overcook it, and that's not what we're after. So it's gonna sit out here while I build up a humongous fire, trying to get this thing as hot as possible. We're talking 500 plus degrees. And then we're gonna put it back in the smoker, about 60 to 90 seconds on each side. So we're gonna have it facing one way, turn it 180 degrees, and then hopefully we have a nice Maillard sear. I'm gonna pull it off, start building a really big fire. Got smoke on here. If we just cut into it now, I mean, if we let it rest and then cut into it without doing anything else, it would already taste amazing. The smell is incredible that's coming off of it. We're gonna do that one last step to increase the flavor so that each bite is packed with as much flavor as possible. Because we have the smoke, now we're gonna have the sear, that Maillard flavor. It's gonna be out of this world good. But I gotta build this fire up. Okay, the smoker is at over 500 degrees. It's like a jet engine in there. It's just pulling super hot air through, and it's gonna do a great job of searing in a short period of time. But we need a little bit of help, and we wanna add some sweetness and some flavor on the outside, not from sugar, but from something much better. When you go to sear a steak, you don't sear it in a dry pan. You use oil because it helps produce that Maillard reaction. We're gonna do the same thing, except we're gonna use some Wagyu beef tallow. It's got this sweet, rich taste that just makes everything better. I use it on vegetables all the time, believe it or not, but it's gonna help out this prime rib. So I'm gonna take off this foil, coat the outside with this Wagyu tallow, put it inside, 60 seconds, turn it, 60 more seconds, take it out, let it rest, and then we're gonna cut into it and see how we did. It's gonna be so good. With this in place, we're ready to sear this thing off. Yep, looks like a jet engine. Here we go. Time for liftoff. Set the timer for 60 seconds. The freaking bugs! They're attacking me right now. What are we at, 15 seconds? And plus, I'm not doing a rib roast in an oven. Like, if I'm gonna cook a rib roast, I'm cooking it with a fire, period. I think we're at like 50 seconds? Yep. Ooh, bubble, bubble. I feel it bubbling through the gloves. That browning, okay. Yeah, this is gonna be money. See the bubbling underneath here? We had a little bit of fat that ruptured and we browned it in that short period of time. So this is looking really good. All right, what we're gonna do is tent it again, give it a few minutes for everything to kind of equilibrate, things to calm down. Then we're gonna cut it open and we're gonna see how we did. If the smell is any indication, we did quite well. Man, this smells great. Okay, we've let this thing rest as long as we can stand, so we're gonna take this foil off and get into it. Looking mighty pretty. Oh man. I'm gonna turn it up on its side so I can see the bone. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, this fat is rendered so well on the outside. Ooh, here we go. And that crust. All right, how'd we do? I'd say that looks pretty darn good. We have red all the way to the outside. We even have red on the very outside from the smoke ring right there. That's not juicy. I don't know what is. Smells incredible. Man, this looks good. I gotta cut out another piece here. Oh. You hear that? The crust on the outside? Oh man. If you have a holiday plate and you're telling me you don't want this on it, first of all, I don't believe you. Second of all, you're crazy. And third, I can't wait to taste this thing. I'm gonna taste 2 parts. I'm gonna taste this outside cap right here. It's just, look at the juice. Look at the juice on that. I mean, any place you touch, just juice. And you're getting the aroma of smoke, you're getting the aroma of that sear. My mouth is watering more than this thing is watering right now. It just looks so darn good. The anticipation, the crust on the outside, this rendered fat, I gotta try it. I'm gonna cut off a piece of this cap, give it a try first. Actually, I'm gonna separate the cap because I am that greedy for delicious beef. This is the piece right here. Now that is a good looking piece of meat. I'm not gonna wait any longer. Oh, so good. It's rich, it's smoky, it's salty, it's beefy. It's like a burn end, but it's not a burn end. It is so good. And I need to try some of this right from the eye. So I'm gonna cut myself a piece, just a little square. By the way, you don't have to cut steaks this big. This is a little excessive, but I like to do things 100%. Even the center right here, juicy, unbelievable. Beefy. Just pure beef flavor. So good. Get a little bit of that black pepper. Just because I'm an animal, I'm gonna cut some of this off the bone. I have a feeling it's gonna be good. Here we go. You get everything all at once. You get barbecue from this rib. You have steak-like flavor from the sear that we did. You have this center cut where you're just tasting pure beef flavor. Man, that's good. That alone would be a great barbecue item. I hope you guys enjoy making this half as much as I have, and I know you're gonna enjoy eating it even more than you enjoy making it. If you guys get out there and start cooking, that's what we really want. We want to get you guys inspired to try maybe some new things, to learn some new techniques, and get out there and make the food for the people that you really care about, your friends, your family, those who are close to you. If you do, make sure to take a picture and post it on social media and tag us because we want to see what you're cooking because that inspires us to keep making content and keep pushing the boundaries of what we can do. So you can tag us at Mad Scientist Barbecue for me and the whole Embers TV crew at Embers TV. We want to see what you do. Good luck and get out there and start cooking. Today we're cooking something that you might not expect to cook on an offset smoker. We're cooking chicken breast, and you might be thinking it breaks all of the rules for low and slow barbecue. It's lean, it's a small cut. You would never do that, right? Wrong. I'm going to show you how to make incredible, juicy, smoky chicken breast on an offset smoker that's going to beat anything you're going to find at any restaurant, any store, any place that's not a genuine Texas barbecue spot. If you've been to Texas and you've gone to some of the top barbecue places, one thing that they have on the menu is turkey breast. And I would do a video on turkey breast and show you guys exactly how to do it, except the problem is that unless you have a meat supplier, getting your hands on pre-brined turkey breasts is a little bit harder to do. But you can easily find chicken breast, and the beauty of it is they're so similar that you can cook them in the same way and get the same kind of results for a whole lot less money. We're gonna start off with our boneless, skinless chicken breast, and we're gonna season with 16 mesh black pepper because it's gonna give a really nice look and a good counterbalance to the salt that we're adding. And the salt itself is gonna be Lowry seasoned salt because the chicken on its own doesn't really have a lot of flavor the same way beef would. So we're gonna add in some flavor with a seasoned salt. We're gonna apply that and let it sit for a while so that salt has an opportunity to penetrate. Then we're gonna put it on the smoker. We're gonna go really low, 200 degrees, and extra smoky. We're gonna keep it as smoky as possible with an open fire going. So this is smoke level 2+ if you wanna check out the fire management video. So it's gonna give it a nice amber golden color, and it's gonna have a lot of smoke flavor. So that smoke is gonna put on a nice amber or golden color, and it's going to give it plenty of smoke flavor. And then when it gets to maybe 115, 120 degrees, we're gonna take it, we're gonna essentially confit it in butter, and that's gonna preserve the moisture and keep everything on the outside from drying out. And you're gonna have an amazingly juicy chicken breast. I guarantee you, if you do it this way, it's gonna be the juiciest chicken you've ever had in your whole life. With that game plan, let's get the chicken and start prepping. All right, we got our chicken here, and all we're gonna do to really get these ready for seasoning is anything that's really thin, I'm gonna cut off because I don't want that to dry out, because our goal is to have every single bite of this chicken be super succulent, full of juice, and that's gonna prevent us from doing that. So just a couple of these little things here so that we have a better final product. This guy looks like it's ready to go. Cut off this fat because we don't need it. All right, and that's just about all we have to do. I'm gonna season the bottom side first because the side we're gonna try to present is this top side. And I'm going to go down with a little bit of seasoned salt first, and then black pepper. Try to get as even a coat as possible. I'm out here dealing with the wind, but that's the barbecue life, so I'll get it as even as I can. And after we have it seasoned, I'm going to let it sit for a few minutes to allow that salt to begin to penetrate, because if I try to cook it too quickly, the salt might not get all the way to the center. That process of diffusion that is going through the chicken breast takes time. So I'll give it as much time as I can. You can actually take it, you can season it beforehand, put it in the fridge for a few hours. You can even do it the night before, and it's totally fine. But we're going to give it a few minutes before we put it on the smoker here. Ideally, this would be in a shaker, but it doesn't have to be too precise. But don't go too heavy, because this is not a huge cut of meat, and you can easily oversalt these. But we're just trying to keep it moderate, but definitely enough salt for this to have flavor. Ooh. Then we're going to flip it over. Try to do the same thing on this side. This is going to help give it kind of a golden color too, which is what we're after when we're finally done here. Then some 16 mesh black pepper. Not too heavy, but just try to get an even coat as much as you can. And that's just about all there is. I'm going to press this pepper down so the wind doesn't carry it away. And we're going to put it on a nice and smoky smoker, try to build that color, try to build that flavor before we finish it off. And we're going to take it to a temperature that requires you to be very accurate. So make sure you have a good digital instant read thermometer. We'll take you through every step of the way. We're going to give this a few minutes, then it goes on the .60 minutes into this cook, and we're starting to get good color on these chicken breasts. They're temping in the high 120s. One, I think, got to about 131 degrees. So at this point, we're ready for the next step in the process. We are going to put them in a pan and add some unsalted butter. Because we already added salt, we don't need more salt in the butter. So unsalted butter in the pan. We want to cover the breasts completely so that we have the entire outside surface soaking in that butter. That's what's going to preserve the moisture on the inside of the breast. And then we can use that butter that we were cooking with to kind of dip the slices if you want even more moisture and even more flavor in every bite. So I'm going to set these aside. Got to keep them separated. So if you look at these, they have a nice golden color, and that tells us that we put on the smoke flavor. And since they're only about 130 degrees, we haven't cooked out all the water. To preserve that and really build another layer of flavor, we're going to add this unsalted butter. You can use salted butter if you want. That's up to you. Unsalted butter you might not have in your kitchen, but make sure that you use enough butter and you compensate for whether or not you have salted or unsalted butter when you season, so that the one thing you need to make sure of is that you add enough butter to completely cover the chicken and lock in that moisture. So here we begin. Okay. I think this is going to be enough butter to completely cover the chicken, which is what we're after. So it's kind of like a confit chicken, but I'm not 100% sure. So I'm going to put it in the smoker and let this butter melt, and then I can evaluate whether or not I need to add another stick. And I'm not after wasting butter, but I just want barely enough. Another reason to put it on the smoker uncovered and let the butter melt is it'll absorb a little bit more smoke flavor. And because this is such a short cook, we're after as much smoke flavor as we can get. And then finally, when you're done and you're dipping it in that butter, you get a little bit more smoke flavor with every bite. And finally, when you're done, if you want to dip this chicken in some of that butter that you used to cook with, it'll have just a little bit more smoke flavor in every single bite. All right, so I'm just going to kind of press this down a little bit, cover these tops while it goes on. More surface area to absorb smoke flavor. One other thing to notice is we put this chicken on the smoker long enough that this black pepper has set, so even though we're putting butter on it now, it's not washing away. More surface area to absorb smoke. All right, back on the pit. After putting this in the smoker, we saw we needed just a little bit more butter, so we added probably another stick of butter right here, and I think that should be good. So at this point, I'm going to cover this with foil in case one of these kind of bobs up. I don't want it to be exposed to more harsh heat. So foil on the outside, we'll put it back in, and once this reaches 155 degrees, it'll be time to come off. Now you might be thinking, 155 degrees, that's not safe. Yes and no. So if you actually look at the USDA guidelines, there's time and temperature that plays a part in killing any microbes that might be present in this chicken. So you can go to 165 and everything dies instantaneously. Or you can go to 160 and everything dies in a matter of seconds. But really, I think a great target temperature is about 155 degrees, and everything should be killed in just under a minute. So if you keep it at 155 for a minute, it should be totally safe. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing this if you're, very young or very old, or if you're immunocompromised, because there's a remote possibility that you don't kill all of the microbes present. But I would refer you to the USDA guidelines, and you make the decision yourself. Generally speaking, the lower the temperature you take it to, the juicier the chicken is going to be. I found the sweet spot to be right at 155. Below that, I don't really like the texture the chicken takes on. And above that, I think it still begins to dry it out just a little bit. But the combination of cooking this in butter and then holding it at that temperature of 155 for 1 minute, I think produces the best texture and the best moisture content in these chicken breasts. And the smoke in combination with the butter produces incredible flavor. So let's finish these off, put them back on, take them to 155 and keep them there for 1 minute. Okay, we're gonna go up to 250 degrees and we're gonna burn a clean, efficient fire because we're not putting any more smoke flavor on that chicken. It's important to note that you can wrap the chicken breast individually in foil, but instead of having multiple butter-filled packets of foil that you have to deal with, I find that it's easier just to use a pan, and you can actually fill it up with multiple layers and just add butter to cover it all, and you get the same results. Now, make sure that you don't overcook this chicken. So feel free to get in there and check it frequently, because if you overcook it, then all those benefits that we talked about are gonna be lost. So keep a close eye on it. It shouldn't take too long, maybe 30 minutes, and it'll be done. We took these to 155 and we pulled them out, let them rest for 1 minute, and actually climbed to 156. So we fulfilled our duties there in terms of making sure all those microbes have died and these are safe to eat. So I'm gonna take one of these out. We're gonna slice it up and we're gonna take a look. This is a great looking piece of chicken. If you don't think this looks good, I think you just don't like chicken. But let's do some slicing and see if it stayed juicy on the inside. I'm gonna move this off the board here. All right, let's see how we did here. So, still nice and juicy. I mean, if you make chicken breast this juicy, you've done a few things right. I mean, just packed with juice. Like, this looks so good. I haven't been dunking this in the butter. This is juice that was retained in the chicken. So, there's nothing left to do but to take a bite. If you like smoky chicken, this is the way to do it. And there's only realistically a little bit of extra fat on the outside. The fat doesn't permeate all the way through the chicken. What this is retained water in there. So you can still eat boneless, skinless chicken breast. You have that texture if you just like that texture. But if you're looking for something a little leaner, you can still go with this. All right. I mean, it's money. All right, here we go. So good. Man, when you can make something in a short time that tastes that good, you question your decisions the next time you're making a brisket or doing some beef ribs or something like that. You're like, I could just do the chicken. It is ridiculously easy. It's super simple. And all you have to do is watch the temperature where this finishes, and you're gonna be blown away by how good this is. I've been cooking and eating meat all week long, and I'm kind of to the place where I'm tired of it. I just took that bite, and I'm right back in that place where I'm like, oh my goodness, it's so good. I can't wait to eat more. You guys need to get out there and give this a shot. If you do, please take a picture, post it on social media, and tag me at Mad Scientist Barbecue. I want to see if you guys are doing this and what kind of results you're getting, because this was a technique I learned from one of my subscribers. And there are other things that I can learn from you guys out there and the ways that you incorporate the principles of barbecue into your cooking at home. So tag me in that, let me know. I can't wait to see what you cook. I used to be hungry for beef, but I am delivered.